yeah, this is not gonna be good. So it doesn't really matter what I say, half the people will be pissed off out of their skull at me anyway, so I'll just do my best to piss off both sides. And just to preempt this, I don't care about Tory internal party politics. This is about a principle of Brexit. No amount of Rees-Mogg will fix what is already broken about Brexit. So we're not going to talk about the Right Honourable Friendship today. And in the interest of full disclosure, as you may know, my accent is a bit deceptive. I am actually German. I just prefer not to sound like a hacksaw having an epileptic fit in a sheet metal factory. I like Britain. I think most nations could learn a lot from Britain. I mean, yeah, you can learn something from every country. You could learn how to maintain a quite impressive army in a shithole country with neither food nor natural resources from North Korea, so it's not a very high benchmark. The culture of banter and disrespect and disregard for politicians and other public servants they have over there is great. I think we should adopt some of that. The early adoption of democracy, I think, is something Britain should be commended for. Pubs are fucking dope. British cuisine is the thinking man's American cuisine. And the Brits make some good beer. I say this as a German, but it's really good. Germany, Belgium, Czechia, Britain, and Ireland are like the high council of beer worldwide, really. America has some good brews, but they've been excommunicated because they've created Bud Light, and they're way more into IPAs than should be legally allowed. On the other hand, I am also very much in favor of the EU. I am a known advocate for sweeping reforms of the EU and its institutions, because the way they stand right now, they are borderline intolerable. The EU has problems. Like a lot of problems. Like, how about we just tear all of this down and make our own EU with oversight and representation level problems? But had I been British, I'm like 90% certain I would have voted Remain. And the British people did vote, and they voted to leave, and I believe that that is their right as citizens of a democratic country. And it's not a bad idea because it's a bad idea to just leave the EU, or because there could never in any way, shape or form be any kind of good Brexit. With good Brexit, by the way, I mean a Brexit that isn't a total catastrophe. The idea was bad from the beginning because neither the people who were tasked with taking Britain out of the EU, nor the people tasked on the side of the EU with making an example of Britain for leaving the EU wanted Britain to leave the EU. And the people that were going to be in charge of taking Britain out of the EU were never going to be people who wanted Britain to leave the EU. You knew this, and you voted to leave anyway. It shouldn't have been that way, obviously. You should have voted, and they should have served as public servants ought to. But objectively, that's not how it works, is it? There was never going to be any kind of good Brexit. I mean, yeah, sure, under a competent government that had the best interest of its citizens in mind, maybe Brexit could have been pulled off in a way that is nice and with the risks minimized that come with it. But if you've been operating under that assumption, oh boy, are you a fucking idiot. No matter how you twist and turn it, any kind of hard Brexit would always have meant that you would be leaving the single largest consumer market in the world. And that is especially a problem for Britain because geographically you are situated in a way that you can optimally trade with that market. Because the EU was never going to allow Britain to retain access to the single market without essentially also keeping it in the Union, except with fewer rights. And nobody in Britain wants that. It is in the EU's best interest to make an example of Britain, because if they don't, other countries might get ideas. And that can't happen. Back when the initial vote was, I saw a lot of people going on about how the EU needed Britain's economy more than Britain needed the EU's economy. And that if Britain just left because it could, because it had this economic advantage over Europe, they would just have to bend the knee to her queen's cash. And even then I thought, what? I mean, don't get me wrong, the United Kingdom is an economic powerhouse of global renown. It's the 5th largest economy in the world by nominal GDP, which is like really good. But in the EU, you have numbers 4, 7, 9, 14, 18, and then all the other countries too. If the European Union were a country, it would have the 2nd highest nominal GDP after the United States. And if Britain leaves the EU, it will still have the 2nd highest nominal GDP after the United States. There are certain benefits to being able to easily trade with that kind of market, especially when you're a fucking export economy. 44% of all UK exports go to the EU. That's gonna be less profitable now. 53% of UK imports come from the EU. That's gonna be more expensive now. The EU will definitely take a solid hit if the United Kingdom leaves. But it's gonna be able to take that hit because it's so much more economically powerful than the UK. I'm not saying that the UK economy will completely collapse. It'll just be massively crippled. Because here's the thing, Britain is not an island. I mean, obviously, geographically it is an island. But when it comes to world markets and the global economy, no individual country, aside from the greatest shitholes on Earth, are islands. There's been this myth floating around, again very prominently, that countries can just shut off from the outside world and then sort of trade with themselves exclusively and grow strong from that. And this may have been possible under a very limited set of circumstances in the 18th century, but fundamentally that's not how that works. And in today's world, that train has long left the station. If you want to be successful in the modern world, you need to be a big-time player in the global economy. And aside from the advantages that Britain already had with its economy, it had another massive set of advantages because most of its trade deals were negotiated through the EU, and the EU has a lot more leverage than the UK. This is one of the main draws of the EU. When you're negotiating trade deals with, say, the US or China or really any nation, being the second largest economy in the world and the single largest consumer market in the world is going to be a lot better as a position than just being some random country. And in the case of a hard Brexit, the UK will not only just be a country and no longer the EU, but it'll also have to renegotiate a fuck ton of its trade agreements in a very short time frame in order to make sure that its economy doesn't completely collapse, while at the same time being a bit of a golden goose. Oh, they'll want to trade with you, but only to fuck you over. And you're going to be forced to take a lot of those shitty deals that will be offered to you, because you'll essentially be cast adrift in the global economy, and if you want to avoid the UK being impoverished, that's what you're gonna have to do. Because really, who's gonna give you a good deal when you're bleeding and swimming in the ocean? The sharks? Is it gonna be the US? Is it gonna be the America First US? Is it gonna be the US in which making the most fucked up deal that fucks over your trading partner for your own benefit is considered to be a societal good? Is it going to be China? Is it going to be the China that has been trying to become the world's predominant superpower? Is it going to be the China that has repeatedly demonstrated that it does not have and does not care about having morals? Is it going to be the China that's working hard on becoming a 21st century colonial empire? Is it going to be the EU? Is it going to be the EU that has a vested interest in fucking you over? Is it going to be the EU that is willing to see you bleed out so you'll come begging to be brought back into the fold? Or is it going to be any of the other numerous countries that wants to trade with the EU more than it wants to trade with the UK? Because trading with the EU is just a lot more money. The fact of the matter is, the US and China are going to make the United Kingdom their bitch if it doesn't have the economic power of the European Union standing behind it. I don't want that to be the case, but this is basic geoeconomics, and it was clear from the very beginning. I also remember a lot of leavers, and they still sometimes bring this argument, that the US will somehow stop trading with the European Union if the UK leaves, and do all of that trade with the UK instead. And a lot of leavers seem to unironically believe this patently absurd notion. America will never stop trading with the EU. Americans want German cars, they want Italian marble, they want French cheese, they want Austrian carbines, they want Swedish furniture, they want Dutch vegetables. They want these things so much that there is a significant trade deficit. To be fair though, that trade deficit is one of the primary contributing factors as to why the US dollar is the #1 global reserve currency, but let's not get sidetracked here. The only sector of the UK economy that I could see getting bigger is tourism. and not for good reasons. I mean, the UK is beautiful. It's got a lot of good culture, it's got a lot of good alcohol, it's got a lot of good food, it's got a lot of friendly people even. And there's the thing that, like, everyone has at least a passing grasp of the language that is spoken there. A lot of people don't vacation in the UK because it's so damn expensive. But that would change quite quickly, and then more people would go to the UK because everything would be cheaper. Some people have been suggesting that the UK could easily become a tax haven and sort of fuck the EU over that way, and then in your face, EU! And you know, that of course does make a lot of sense. I mean, it's not like there are major nations around Europe that are already tax havens, some of which are part of the EU single market. Also, I'm genuinely curious, did you actually believe that a conservative government, which has been trying to dismantle and sell off the NHS for years, would use the money that it no longer pays to the EU for the NHS? But even considering the lies about the economic ramifications that were floating around before the referendum, I could see why especially the United Kingdom would want to leave the EU. I mean, freedom from a government that is sitting on an entirely different landmass and has been telling you how you should conduct your business for a long time, even though maybe you have your own ideas as to how business should be conducted, is a very enticing thing, representation or no. Nobody wants other people dictating to them who they can and cannot be friends with. Nobody wants other people to have a big say in the openness of their borders. Nobody wants to just be an afterthought in a huge government and get constantly steamrolled by it. And you know, I do kind of also say this unironically, because wanting more autonomy for your country is a completely legitimate cause. I mean, Britain had some of the most closed borders of any EU country in the first place. You're not even in Schengen. You could stay in the EU and keep your borders closed, or close them further. The EU would prefer that not happen, but the people who actually make that call are British elected officials, and they want the borders to stay open. And they will still be there when you're no longer in the EU. There is one good argument for Brexit, and one good argument alone. The European Union is an intransparent and fundamentally undemocratic body of government, and we would rather take the risks of leaving it than be further subjected to its capriciousness and corruption. And that's, you know, true. The problem is, unfortunately, that in our globalized world, the arbitrary borders of authority that we had will have to change into different arbitrary borders of authority if we want to stand a fighting chance of doing anything at all. It's a complex set of considerations, but those considerations must be made. And really, who better to make them than a nation's own people? This is why I believe that you guys should have a second Brexit referendum. And if you believed in the first Brexit referendum, you should also be believing in a second Brexit referendum, unless of course you're a hypocrite. My fundamental argument is this. Back when the original Brexit vote happened, the people of the United Kingdom voted for a vaguely defined idea. They didn't know what exactly that would entail and what exactly would happen, even though a lot of people claimed to know, they didn't. Now there's an actual deal on the table. Bullet points and clauses, something concrete that one could look at, instead of just some ill-defined idea. The people of the United Kingdom today would be making a more informed choice because they would be voting on an actual piece of paper instead of just some idea that is something different to every person. I mean, of course, that vote should wait for the official finalized deal, but that doesn't seem too far away. And if you believe that the British people were informed enough and intelligent enough to make the choice in that first referendum, you should also believe that the British people are informed and intelligent enough to make that choice in a second referendum. And I'm not saying this referendum should be this shitty deal or remain. I think there should be three options on the ballot. There should be the option of this is a good deal and I think we should take it. There should be the option of, we shouldn't be leaving the EU at all, what are you doing? And there should be the option of, I think we should leave the EU, but this deal is shit and we shouldn't take it. And also the thing should of course be ranked choice voting so that nobody can claim that the vote is being split. If you've been insisting that Brexit is the product of democracy and that is why it is what the people of the United Kingdom want, you should be open to the people of the United Kingdom making that same choice again if that is actually what they want. Or are those same British people suddenly too stupid and uninformed to be involved in the process of democracy now that there's a chance that you might lose? And here's the thing, even if Britain does end up deciding to leave, hard or soft or in any way, shape or form, it would be the only country that does so. Other countries will threaten to leave, and in my opinion, they should, because that is a good motivator for the EU to change, because the EU is in dire need of sweeping reforms. But the reason the UK can leave in the first place is because they're not as deeply interwoven with the EU as, say, Poland, or Germany, or France, or Austria, or really any other EU country. As it stands, Brexit is a total disaster, and the only people who don't think so are Theresa May, because she's Theresa May, and the EU, because the EU got pretty much everything it wanted. As was clear would happen from the beginning, because as we've already established, the EU went into these negotiations with a way stronger hand. But even as bad as it is, it's not nearly as bad as it could have been. And for other countries that would potentially want to leave the EU, the current level of shitty would be like a best case scenario for them. So it's not gonna happen. Thank you very much for watching. Leave your hateful screeds in the comments down below. They will 100% increase engagements and traffic with this video. I do appreciate the reasons for leavers and remainers both. They both have legitimate arguments. I'm not saying that all leavers are cunts or that all remainers are cunts. They're just people making choices. They have different priorities and they have different levels of information, different kinds of information, that kind of thing. But the leavers are wrong. In that spirit, do democracy, appreciate democracy, yeah, and see you around, cunts.